This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Audience, I am thrilled to bring you today's conversation with Dr. Andy Little, a colleague friend I've known for years as a medical educator and someone who really helped me launch this podcast. Andy is a program director of emergency medicine in Orlando, Florida. He's the co-host of EM Over Easy podcast, the official podcast of ACOEP. That's the American College of Osteopathic Emergency Physicians. This literally started as a breakfast conversation at a diner and has grown into something very special. Today we're diving into 3 topics: how AI is changing medical education, Andy's personal journey from small-town Montana to emergency medicine leadership, and finally, to how Andy takes care of himself, a little venture into lifestyle medicine. Because let's be honest, emergency medicine does not teach us how to take care of ourselves. Before we jump in, though, today's episode is actually sponsored by Microskills and the Visible Voices podcast. This holiday season, here's a book worth giving. Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. Big change starts smaller than you think. This book reveals what science already knows. Transformation happens through small, actionable behaviors and steps, not grand gestures. And we know that building blocks compound over time. For the high schooler mapping their future, the professional ready to level up, and the leader who knows there's always more to learn. Audiobook, ebook, and print. Available at all booksellers online, including Amazon, Bookshop, and more. Give the book that gives people back their agency. Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. One of the ways that you came across my radar was through EM Over Easy. So for audience members that aren't familiar, tell us about the podcast.
Yeah, so this is a podcast that was born in a diner. We officially started in May of 2016, but our show grew up a couple years before that. So Drew Kalnow, Tanner Ganowski, the original 3 of us, we started meeting at this diner because we all were training at the same place at Doctor's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. We weren't hanging out as much as we wanted to. So Drew said, hey, we should get together at this diner by my house after night shifts. What started as mental health check-ins turned into these elaborate 1 to 2 hour breakfasts where we talked about all things leadership, hospital, how do we become better communicators. And over the course of that, we realized there was a lot of things we weren't learning in residency that would be required for us to be attendings. And so I attended a CORD, which is Council of Residency Directors, in 2016 in Nashville, Tennessee, and went to a session on how to start a podcast. Got to sit at the feet of some people that we know, Anand Swami Nathan, Salim Rezai, Rob Rogers, Steve Carell, who already had shows. And they said, hey, this is how you start a podcast. And I literally texted Drew and Tanner and said, let's start a podcast. Let's call it EM Over Easy. Let's just record our conversations at breakfast. And to me, the best was that Tanner was all in and Drew goes, that's not your worst idea yet. And that's how we started. So yeah.
Oh, yeah. Such a good story. Yeah. And for audience members who are not yet familiar, one of the great things is the logo, and it's literally like an Over Easy egg. Where'd the logo come from?
It's funny, when we were talking about it, we said we needed I had to upload an artwork for iTunes, and I literally just was in my house and cracked an egg. So the first 7 episodes was an actual egg on a skillet with overlying things, and then I just said, hey, we need to actually probably have a real logo. So took that idea as the O was going to be the yolk of an egg. So yeah.
One of the many things I learned from you about podcasting and building a podcast is, sure, it's the group of hosts who you just named, but also you have empowered people at all levels and all skill sets, including medical students. And for the medical educators and even non-medical, but educators who are listening, what are creative ways to integrate learners to empower them to play a role in the podcasting journey?
Yeah, I think it's just opportunities. The first one that came along was Patricia Capone, who's now a chief resident in Columbus, Ohio, about to do a med ed fellowship. But she came to us through a research project I did between her first and second year of med school. And I just said, hey, I run this podcast. Would you want to write some blogs for us? It was just, here's the thing. Here's a task I'm doing that I don't say I don't like, but I didn't love. And she volunteered to do it. And so her and another medical student, Spencer, they started writing for us. And then that led it to where now we basically bring on a medical student every couple of years to blog write for us. And then over the course of their time with us, we work it up to where now they're guests on our medical student show. And then, Patricia's now our blog editor. And I think it's really, whenever you create a product, whatever it is, whether it's a podcast, a blog, or an educational series is find opportunities for medical students who are interested in your niche, and then just kind of let them run with it. Because that's to the point where like we create our show, I send it over to the team. They do a ton of the back end work that makes the podcast work. I mean, the hosts really focus on creating good content. And then we have a team built with medical students, residents, and now attendings who do all the stuff to make the rest of the magic work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my own interactions with you and working with you, you seem to allow a long leash.
Mm-hmm.
True or false?
True. And that's me paying back. I look at, as we talk about my journey in emergency medicine, I got really involved with the ACOEP, or the American College of Osteopathic Emergency Physicians, as a DO medical student.
Listeners are like, wait a minute, ACOEP. So break it down. You're a DO and ACOEP. Discuss.
Yes. So when people think of emergency medicine specialty organizations, they think of ACEP, American College of Emergency Physicians. And within every house of medicine, there's a version of that, whether it's American College of Physicians, American Association of Pediatrics, but there's usually an osteopathic, I don't want to say cousin because they don't work together, but there's an osteopathic group that represents the same people that happen to be DOs. So when I was a medical student, I went to, at that time, the ACOAP's student chapter and got involved. And in all of those experiences, starting out as a conference planner and then being the president of the student organization and then becoming, vice president as a resident, I was always given a long leash in that, like, the more I found the more you trust people, the better they perform. And so when it comes to our team, I trust Patricia and Caitlin and Molly, who run our med student show, immensely, to where their product's awesome. And I find that if I get in the way, it actually like stunts their creativity. And so I think it's looking for low cost successes to allow people to get entry level positions. But as they get more involved in the organization, I let people run with it, because that's what is the special sauce that makes Emo over easy work, is the four of us run with it.
That leash, though, also translates to the clinical environment. So when you're an attending on shift and you're overseeing a resident doctor or a medical student, sometimes the patient's emergent. Sometimes things need to move quickly or be done right or as well as possible. Do you think you have the same leash in the clinical environment?
I can tell you I don't. My residents sometimes complain that I don't. And it's not that they complain. It's, if it is a non-critical patient, I will let the residents, there's a lot of leeway in like what we order and what the workup is, as long as it's within, there's two standard deviations. But if it's a critical patient, I have like a 10-second countdown to where they know what the patient need. And if they don't address it quickly, I will step in and address it. But then I feel like I've gotten really good at mastering the skill of stepping in, addressing the concern, stepping back, letting them manage. And then when another thing's not met, step in and manage, and then step back once I feel like they're safe. So it's a fine balance of being, when you teach residents, you want them to gain that autonomy over the course of their program, but you also have to you can't let them sink, because if you let them sink, patients suffer.
You mentioned ACOEP and being a DO. One of the EM over easy episodes recently focused on an article in the New York Times about MD DO. And I loved the banter. I loved the conversation, because you all were giving your own experience, having grown up in emergency medicine, now all into your second decade of practice. What's changed? What has not changed culturally in terms of that perception, or how you're wearing the identity of a DO?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Resa. I remember when I got into medical school in the mid 2000s, going to DO school was still semi-controversial among kind of the greater public. Being in Ohio, it wasn't. Ohio University's been there since the 70s. It has graduated large amounts of osteopathic physicians all over the state. To where my first introduction to a DO was when we moved from Montana to Ohio, and my dad went to PA school, and our family physician was a DO. His name's Dr. Murphy, practices in Bellbrook, Ohio. And I didn't know the difference between the two, other than like Dr. Murphy was the best doctor I ever had. And I don't know if it was because he was a DO. I think it's because he's a great person, but he happened to be a DO, to where when I applied to osteopathic school, it was my university had a great tie to OU, where I ended up going. And then my local community was like, everybody knew who DOs were, because DOs were in Ohio. But as I'm originally from out west, a lot of my family were like, well, what's this DO thing? I don't know what a DO is. They're from Utah, Nevada, California, where it's predominantly MDs. And so there was definitely a perception of having to, teach people about what a DO was. And I think the short story is, back in the 1800s, AT Still, who was an MD, didn't like the way MDs were practicing medicine. This is post-World War II. This is the era of cutting people's limbs off and doing bloodletting and things that were pretty controversial in medicine, I think everybody agrees with. And so he came up with osteopathy. And then from there to now, there really isn't a difference in terms of how we practice. And when I say there isn't a difference, there isn't a difference. In the emergency department, I prescribe the same adenosine for SVT that you prescribe. You could maybe argue that 20 years ago, DO schools were more holistic in the way we approach patients, but I would argue that MD schools have realized that's an important part of the curriculum, to where now MD schools are teaching almost the same thing, minus they don't teach osteopathic manipulative therapy, which I don't use much in my clinical practice in the emergency department, and that's mostly because of time. That's a great thing to do. I think if you've got a 30-minute visit with a patient, you can add that layer of, hey, well, we've got you here. You've got some back pain. Let's diagnose you. Let's treat you. But in the emergency department, it's just not part of my workflow, to where there are certain patients I do it on, specifically patients with shoulder complaints and headaches. But even then, it's the soft side of it all. There's no HVLA. There's no high velocity cracking. None of those kind of treatments. So
Famously, on the Visible Voices podcast, Dr. Barbara Ross Lee was on, and the first Black woman dean of a medical school in the United States, and she obviously championed DO medical schools, and I believe it was Ohio that
that's where she started.
Yeah.
No, she's a great lady. She spoke at my graduation. She's it's hard not to know who Barbara Ross Lee is if you're a DO. Really, if you're not peripherally involved, she's just an amazing human being, and it was great to see her on your show.
Yeah. And in fact, when I reached out to her, she said, Resa, why do you want to speak with me? And I was like, Dr. Ross Lee, why would I not want to speak with you?
Person.
I've been hearing about you since medical school. You are a visible voice. So actually, that's then a great time for me to ask you, Andy, when did you realize you had a voice? When did you start using that voice?
I think that's an interesting point. It goes way back before I started the podcast. People ask, like, what makes Andy Little tick? And I'm a small town kid who got a shot. And,
tell us more.
I'm number 5 of 6 kids. My hometown I'm originally from is Bozeman, Montana, which at the time had maybe 20,000 people. My dad was a blue collar person, ran a trucking company. In his late 30s, became a firefighter paramedic on a whim, and then went to PA school in his 40s. And so I view my entire life of, like, this isn't what was supposed to happen. Like, I'm supposed to be living in that small town, having a blue collar job, working at my dad's warehouse. And then you fast forward now to where I've been, moved to Ohio, been given this great opportunity to see my dad go through college and fight for his family from an educational standpoint, and then kind of reshape his career in his 40s. And then really just been given a ton of amazing opportunities that I refuse to let go of. And then also not want to share those with other people. And so when I was in medical school, I started being involved at student organizations, and then really got more involved nationally, and wanted to be a part of the landscape of emergency medicine, really because there are a lot of small town kids like me who don't feel like they can get out. And I've been blessed with, you take the right amount of luck, the right amount of hard work, and stick-to-itiveness, you can do whatever you want. And so, this wasn't supposed to happen, Resa. I'm not supposed to be here.
But yet you are. And did you always have it in you? Did you, growing up in Bozeman, did you say to yourself, I'm out of here, or I'm meant to get out of here and do something? Yeah. Like, was it in you?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. If you ask my parents, yes, I don't remember that. Like, I think the moment that I remember the most was that first summer we moved to Ohio, where I was like, I don't have to be this small town kid anymore. Like, I was getting better at athletics, and that kind of became a big part of how I could express myself as a high schooler. And then was doing music and some other stuff, and I just realized that, like, as long as I put the work in, the output can be getting out and being better and being more. And so I just went to work. And I think when I talk to people now, they're like, "What's your secret sauce?" Do the work, because if you do it long enough, you'll fail enough, but then you'll succeed enough, and then you just. I always say, and I don't like the term lucky, but I use it, but it's you're lucky because you work hard. And if you work hard enough, long enough, the luck starts to go your way.
In micro skills, we start with these 3 truths, and one is the world is not equal. And, one of the impetus was to create access to the playbook that people didn't get a copy of. And for different and some overlapping reasons, my co-author and I didn't get a copy of the playbook. And you generously shared when you interviewed us, me too. Like, I didn't get that copy. And I was really moved by that. I'm wondering if you can share more about that.
Yeah, I think it's when we talk about the playbook, when people look at the face value, it's easy to, we talk about DEI, which is a very important topic that is dear to my heart, and making sure that those of underserved areas and privileges get the best opportunity possible. But, a lot of assumptions get made when people meet me of like, oh, Andy's white, oh, he has two parents, like a lot of, but I came from a home where like my grandparents weren't educated. My dad was educated, but not till he was in his 40s. My mom only has a high school diploma. My mom was a homemaker. Again, being number 5 of 6 kids, where my parents were just happy we all graduated high school and kind of went to college, and it was like, go to college, like that was their success, you know. And then I remember when I went to apply to medical school, there was no one in my family who had ever done that, and so I remember having to lean pretty heavy on my college guidance counselor, Eugene Burns, who was amazing, and then some of the docs that I worked with, as I was a unit secretary for 3 years in undergrad. But even then, like I was using their shared experience, and most of those individuals, because of where I lived, they were also first generation succeeders, and so they're like, well, this is the playbook that kind of worked for me. And so, in looking at what micro skills is, what I loved about your guys' book is it normalizes the idea that like there is no pedigree that gets you ready for this, on either side. And so I remember when I read it, I was very touched on the idea that like this would have been amazing for 18-year-old Andy Little to have. And it's something that I bought it for my son when he graduated high school, and it's become a gift I give to people as they go through life achievements, because there are skills in your guys' book that you guys basically tease out a lot of the guesswork that wasn't available before the World Wide Web and before this idea that you could learn from somebody thousands of miles away.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing
No.
that. And,
Yeah.
you know, continuing, you mentioned blue collar, and I wonder if that also was one of these things that people just assumed you came from that sense of financial privilege.
But yeah, no, it's something to where I remember the first time this came up, it was the second year medical school. I was applying for a scholarship, and I mentioned to a friend, I was like, oh, I'm applying for this scholarship. And they just said, well, why would you get it? Aren't your parents rich? And I was like, well, what are we talking about here? And they're like, I'm like, my parents have always been able to pay their bills. They've always been able to live the lifestyle they want. But I'm going to mention 5 of 6 kids. Like, so my parents had no financial plan for the 6 of us all to succeed and require additional funds beyond getting us into high school. And I don't hold them accountable for that at all, because they were doing the best they could with what they had. But it's there definitely was some of this like, oh, well, you're the white kid from, affluence. And it's like, again, my parents have nice stuff, but they ain't sharing it with me. And that's what I would always tell people. Like, my parents have money, but they don't have any extra. And so I think it's one of those where as we interact with people, it's really easy to assume their background based off of, some external factors. And just remember that like everybody's got some suffering in their family. And I think it's important to give people the grace to operate as they need to, and then just be there to support them.
Before we jumped on and hit play, we were talking about everybody's got a story.
Hmm.
We all have stories that get us to where
Yeah.
we are. And, one of the amazing aspects of being an emergency physician is we are witness to stories every day, every shift. And so whenever I hear people say, well, I don't really have any stories. I don't know any stories. I'm like, are you kidding? If you're a physician, you are receiving stories. And the reason you are a storyteller is not only do you receive it, you have to somehow collate it, type it, or write it in a chart, and often then share it with the next person. It's almost like a game of telephone of storytelling.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's one of the best parts of our job is, whenever I think about, how hard my life is or how bad I've got it or whatever, the ED is life's great perspective. I get to take care of patients on a regular basis who don't know where their next meal is coming from, don't know where they're going to sleep tonight, have had to make decisions that, like, I remember early on in my career, I would judge them and be like, oh, that's such a thing I would never do. But then now, as someone who's a little more seasoned and been doing this longer, I realize that like my life and their life are 1,000 decisions different. And so I can't judge them from my point of view, because I've never had to make those decisions before. Like, I've never been given that opportunity or been made to have that opportunity. I guess not, I wouldn't say given, never been made to make that decision. And so I love the stories that patients tell me. It actually is like the thing that invigorates me the most is, despite all the stuff that we know happens at work, death, dying, bad news, all that kind of stuff, there's also a lot of really good in our patients that if we just sit and listen, there's a lot of beauty there that gets taken for granted.
And a lot of very light and funny stories that happen
Yes.
sprinkled in with some of the
You
intensity.
decided to do what with what? All right, I'm going to go back to my 15-year-old brain here, and I'm going to be your buddy in the basement with you, like thinking this plan. And you thought that was a good idea because okay, all right, let's take it out. We'll figure it out. It's all good. Yeah.
For people that are watching us today, you're wearing a jacket that says ERCast. What's ERCast?
So ERCast is one of the shows that I've been blessed to be a part of. So again, started EM Over Easy in 2016, and as Resa knows, if you're in this community long enough, you just meet some amazing people. And so somebody you had on the show recently, Mizuho Morrison, who's now the editor for MRAP, at a time, we had her on EM Over Easy, and she just reached out to my co-host Drew Callan and I and said, "Hey, come out and record some segments for Hippo Education, who owns UC Rap and ERcast." And then you start doing some work with other people, and eventually you get asked to be on better shows. And this is a show that, like, I remember when I got the call to be a host for, was very, very fortunate and grateful, because it's a show that Rob Orman, who's one of the, the grandfathers of emergency medicine podcasting, started. And then, to be kind of handpicked by him and his team to be one of the people to work with the show, it's just been a great blessing. And it's another opportunity for me to educate and to share and have a broader audience. And I think, like anything, if you do enough of the work long enough and you work hard enough, opportunities come. This has been a great opportunity. So yeah.
The medical education, the EM medical educator space is really special and generous and kind and full of just lovely humans. I asked Mies when she came on about AI, and you are a program director, you are a podcaster, you're a medical educator. Where is AI playing a role in what you do or in your trainees? Where should it play a role? Where are we not yet ready for prime time, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of in the my buddy did my homework phase, where it's a lot of like people will use it and they'll plug in a prompt and they just like accept it as valid. But we're in that, like, we need to be very careful, and that AI is still learning how to do medical education. And I say that from it's new to this, and so as you use it, know that, like, the first, and I've been intensely using AI since February for med ed stuff. But the first 5 or 6 months, I mean, probably the last month or so, I've started to trust what it outputs without doing a ton of digging. But it's pretty common that, like, it's just like an intern, where it doesn't know what it doesn't know, but it doesn't want to admit it doesn't know it. And so it's confidently incompetent. But so you got to really, really work on it. But I use it for outlines. So whenever I give a talk now, so like I'm giving some talks coming up, and they're new talks to me. So I put into AI, I found the references I wanted. I said, look, and this is the way I want my talk written. And it took 4 or 5 iterations, but it finally pumped out an outline that I think I can use as a handout. And then when I lecture for residents, and then I make a one pager after I lecture for them, I use AI to do that. But that's a lot of heavy input, and it does some of the finishing that used to take me hours, it'll do in a short period of time. So I think it's where, if you use the analogy of it's an intern where it's confidently incompetent, just know that, like, you're going to have to do some fact checking. But I know that if we look at its progression in other businesses, it's going to get to where it's going to become a senior resident, where you can kind of just let it do its thing and fact check it a little bit, but it's going to be smart enough to offload a lot of the stuff that used to take you and I hours to create episodes, slides for conferences. It's going to be able to do that in minutes with the right amount of output. So
what about in the clinical environment? Is AI playing any role for you yet?
Yeah, so we use it. We use DAX, which is, it's just one of the versions of it for our EMR, to where now it's in the room when I meet with patients. So I just plug it in, and it creates the HPI, it creates the review systems for my note, and then it starts to create what I think isn't what it thinks is an MDM. And again, that's where it's really confident of what I want to worry about, and then I have to go back and edit it. But it's offloaded probably half an hour charting a shift by using it. And I think, and that's where it's, as long as we use it in the right areas, it's going to be a real helpful. And I think the other part that I use it in clinical is I now use it when I create, there's not a specific set of discharge instructions, there's always things that patients come in with that I'm like, there's nothing in the EMR for this. And so I'll use AI, again, find a couple of resources I want the patient to be able to use, and then have it create some discharge instructions for me. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Got it. You shared that you were an athlete, and you kind of started finding your voice and getting your groove in high school. Mm-hmm. And you and your team of EM Over Easy recently had a very touching episode talking about, actually it was 2 episodes that touched me, because they both were about taking care of self-care. One you focused on for Men's Health Awareness Month, and one was one of your co-hosts talked about working with a coach to have better food as medicine, nutritional choices. And we know healthcare does not teach us how to take care of ourselves. No, it doesn't model it. It doesn't laud it. Mm-hmm. And, we all grew up in emergency medicine where you didn't have time to eat. You never called in sick. When you were sick, not having to sleep was sort of a badge of courage. So I'd love to know where you are in your own self-care, Andy Little men's health journey.
So I'm definitely at that, looking back at the last 15 years, a lot of shaking my head that, younger versions of me would not be proud of the way that I've handled myself the last 15 years, in terms of, trying to push myself to the edge and overwork and undersleep and just eat what's available instead of making smart choices. But that all kind of came to a head about a year ago, where, again, had that didn't have a sentinel event, which you never hope. I'm glad I didn't have. We all know physicians who have the heart attack in their 40s, and that's like the big onus for them to do better. But no, it's to the point where like we talked about on both of those segments is that it's what are the small incremental changes I can make to where like, okay, so I'm going to quit eating potato chips after 10 o'clock. Just simple things that like don't seem like it's a big deal, but that's how we got here. We got here by making 2 or 3 bad decisions daily with our diet and our exercise regimen to where, 15 years later, 60 pounds that I didn't want to have, that's what happens. And so now it's the opposite of what are the small incremental changes I can make every day? And then how do I incorporate exercise to where I definitely take a lot more time than I ever have to make sure that like on my schedule is 6 1-hour blocks of Andy gets to be active. And so like literally we're going to get off recording this segment and I've got a couple meetings that start later this afternoon, but I'm going to go be active for an hour. And it doesn't have to be, I don't run like I used to because I just don't like running anymore. But like I'm going to go be active. And so I think that's where it's as physicians, we put our health, just like everything else we put on the line. We put family relationships, we put, mental health. We definitely put our physical health on the line during our training. And it's one now that when I work with senior residents as they're about to graduate, I bring up, what are your exercise plans? What are your take care of you plans? And it's amazing how they're like, oh, they think it's a trip to Europe. They think it's, it's like, well, that doesn't count. Like that's not taking care of you. That's taking some days off, but that's not like what's going to be your grind of a lifestyle now that you're going to add this layer of making better eating choices, better sleeping choices, and better exercise choices. Cause it's something that we all want to avoid the big one. And the only way to do that is to like kind of go back and make up for lost time.
Yeah. I love this share. And I do think as a program director, you're actually now encouraged/forced to make sure you're looking at that for your trainees. So hence we know everything starts with the self. So you probably have to look at it for yourself. So I heard 2 things. I'd love to hear 3. So no potato chips after 10 p.m. Scheduling in, 6 1 hours. That's a good commitment. I love that. What's the third? Tell me one more thing, behavior change. One more micro skill Andy Little has done.
It's my sleep. So anybody who knows me knows that I'm an insomniac, and I use that as a superpower during training. And I was like, I only need 3 hours of sleep.
Same.
But now it's I've got to go to bed. And so now I've worked it out to where my phone is present because it's my alarm clock, but I sleep away from my phone. I try to get away from screens the last hour before I go to sleep. I used to eat before I went to bed, and now I just don't. I just go to bed hungry, which is fine. It's that idea that like I had to do it. But I've got a pretty set routine of the non-medications you can do, and it's good sleep hygiene, and then making sure that when I get up, it's intentional. I'm getting up for a good reason. And I think that's the big thing too, is I used to just like wake up early and then stay up. And now it's like, no, if I'm going to get up, I got to do something. And so if I get up, I need to go get tired again so I can, sleep later. So I think sleep's the third one for me, where I'm really focusing on that 3.5 hours of sleep I probably averaged in residency was not healthy. And now we know that the studies come out, it's like cognitive decline, Parkinson's are all directly tied to that. And so I hope that I can, get away from some genetic influences in that too, and try to help myself and sleep better.
Yeah. Andy, for people that want to follow you and your work, what's the best way to keep in touch and follow along?
Yeah, you can follow me on on Twitter and Instagram at Andy G Little. That's the same on both ones. My pitch is I'm here to help. And so if you find yourself in a pinch where my skills could be helpful to you, please reach out. As Resa will point out, I will be a little. My answers might be short. Our phone calls will be succinct. But I love the fact that I get to give back, and by giving back, by helping people that feel lost. So anytime.
The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trend spaces. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Find me at Resa E. Lewis, MD on social media, or visit thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts and watch our episodes on YouTube. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not reflect the opinions of their institutions. Information shared here should never substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice. Together, we're making healthcare more equitable, one visible voice at a time.